Here, where the Wright brothers first flew their first flight.
There are people in this world who seem untouchable. Not in an arrogant way. Not in a cold, distant way. But in the way that makes you feel like no matter what is happening around them, they will always be the steady hand. The calm in the middle of the storm. Andy Griffith was that kind of person. Everyone who ever worked beside him said the same thing without being asked. He was warm. He was patient. He was the kind of man who made you feel like the most important person in the room just by looking at you. On the set of the Andy Griffith Show, while cameras were being repositioned and lighting was being adjusted, Andy was the one cracking jokes, breaking into old songs, and making sure nobody took themselves too seriously. That was simply who he was. Or at least, who the world believed him to be. Because here is the truth that very few people ever talk about. Behind every person who appears unshakable, there is always a moment. A single, unrepeatable moment where the weight of something so enormous, so sudden, and so devastating tears right through every wall they have ever built around themselves. For Andy Griffith, that moment did not come from a difficult co-star. It did not come from a failed film or a brutal review or years of watching awards go to everyone except him. It came from something that stopped an entire nation cold. Something that turned an ordinary Tuesday afternoon into a day nobody who lived through it would ever be able to forget. Before we get there, you need to understand something important about the man himself. Because the story of what happened on that set means nothing unless you first understand who Andy Griffith really was beneath the sheriff's badge and the easy smile. He was born in June 1926 in Mount Airy, North Carolina, to parents who had almost nothing. His father worked hard, but money was always scarce, and for a period of time, the situation became so difficult that Andy had to be sent to live with relatives. When he finally came home, the family had managed to scrape together enough to buy a house. But the house was completely empty. No furniture. No beds. No crib for a young child. His first bed was a dresser drawer lined with whatever soft material his parents could find. That image right there tells you everything you need to know about where Andy Griffith started. And it makes everything that followed feel all the more remarkable. Growing up with very little has a way of doing one of two things to a person. It either makes them bitter, or it makes them hungry. For Andy Griffith, it made him hungry in the best possible way. Not for money or fame, at least not at first. But for something to belong to. Something that made the struggle feel worthwhile. He found that something in music. As a boy growing up in Mount Airy, Andy was quiet and self-conscious. He was the kid who tried to disappear into the background rather than draw attention to himself. The kind of kid who noticed everything but said very little. But music changed that. The moment he discovered he could pick up an instrument and make something beautiful come out of it, something shifted inside him. And the moment he realized he could make people laugh, something shifted even further. Suddenly the shy boy who wanted to blend into the walls was looking for a spotlight instead. A local minister named Ed Mickey saw that spark before almost anyone else did. Mickey taught Andy how to play instruments, helped him develop his voice, and encouraged him to take his talents seriously. His influence was so strong that when Andy graduated high school in 1944 and enrolled at the University of North Carolina, he initially followed his mentor's path and studied theology, fully intending to become a Moravian preacher. It didn't take long before he realized that was someone else's calling, not his. He switched to music, graduated with a degree in the subject, and threw himself into every performance opportunity the university had to offer. He led the school's chapter of Phi Mu Alpha Sinfonia, one of the oldest and most prestigious music fraternities in the country. He starred in student productions and earned a reputation as someone whose presence on a stage was simply impossible to ignore. But even after graduating, Hollywood wasn't calling yet. Instead, Andy took a job teaching music and drama at a high school in Goldsboro, North Carolina. He poured everything into that classroom, and one of his students, a young man named Carl Cassell, would go on to become one of the most recognizable voices in the history of public radio. Andy had traded the dream of stardom for something quieter. A steady job, a modest life, and in 1949, a marriage to a woman named Barbara Bray Edwards. Together they adopted 2 children and built something that looked, from the outside, like a perfectly comfortable life. But comfort and calling are two very different things. And deep down, Andy Griffith already knew that the stage was not finished with him yet. The moment that changed everything did not arrive through a phone call from a Hollywood producer or a meeting with a powerful agent. It arrived through a comedy record. In 1953, Andy recorded a monologue called What It Was Football. The routine followed a simple, naive country preacher trying to make sense of a college football game for the very first time. It was warm, it was funny, and it felt completely authentic because in many ways it was. The character reflected pieces of Andy's own upbringing, his own voice, and his own way of seeing the world. Audiences didn't just enjoy it. They loved it. The record climbed all the way to number 9 on the charts and turned Andy Griffith into a name that millions of people suddenly recognized overnight. That unexpected success opened doors that had previously seemed completely out of reach. In 1955, he landed the television version of No Time for Sergeants, playing a lovable country boy named Will Stockdale struggling to adjust to life in the Air Force. The role suited him so naturally that when the production moved to Broadway, Andy went with it. Critics were stunned. The New York Times suggested that Andy barely needed to do anything at all to get a laugh. Simply walking onto the stage and looking out at the audience was enough to draw a reaction. His presence alone carried a kind of electricity that very few performers ever develop. A Tony nomination followed in 1956, but the award went to someone else. It was the first of several painful near misses that would quietly follow Andy throughout his entire career. Still, Broadway brought him the Theatre World Award in something far more valuable than any trophy. It brought him to the attention of director Elia Kazan, who was searching for the lead in his ambitious new film, A Face in the Crowd. Kazan later explained that the moment he heard Andy's comedy record and watched him perform on television, he knew immediately he had found exactly what he was looking for. But the role of Larry Lonesome Rhodes was nothing like anything Andy had played before. The character was manipulative, explosive, and morally corrupt in every direction. So far removed from Andy's real personality that Kazan admitted he kept Andy drinking during the filming of the most intense scenes because it was the only way to pull the necessary aggression out of him. In real life, Kazan said, Andy simply wanted to be friends with everybody. That warmth was not a performance. It was not something he turned on for cameras. It was simply who he was. And it was precisely that quality that would soon make him one of the most beloved figures in the entire history of American television. The road to Mayberry was not a straight one. After the success of No Time for Sergeants on Broadway and the critical recognition of A Face in the Crowd, Andy signed on for a comedy film called Onionhead in 1958 with genuinely high hopes. On paper it looked like another major step forward. In reality it became one of the most painful professional disappointments of his life. The film failed with critics, struggled at the box office, and disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. For the first time in years, Andy found himself questioning whether Hollywood was really where he belonged. Rather than keep chasing opportunities that clearly were not working, he made a decision that surprised almost everyone around him. He walked away from film entirely. And that decision, as painful and uncertain as it felt at the time, turned out to be the single best career move he ever made. Television brought him back. A guest appearance as a small-town sheriff in an episode of Make Room for Daddy gave audiences their very first glimpse of what would eventually become one of the most iconic characters in American television history. But this early version of Sheriff Andy Taylor was nothing like the warm, wise lawman that millions would soon fall in love with. This version was clever in a much craftier sense. When he pulled over Danny Thomas for running a stop sign and realized the man worked in show business, he quietly raised the fine on the spot. When Danny threatened to report him to the Justice of the Peace, Andy informed him calmly that he was the Justice of the Peace. When Danny threatened to expose the whole situation through the local newspaper, Andy mentioned just as calmly that he also happened to be the editor of the Mayberry Gazette. It was funny precisely because it was so shameless. But when the Andy Griffith Show officially launched, that cunning opportunist disappeared completely, replaced by a sheriff who led with patience, wisdom, and a kind of quiet moral authority that audiences had rarely seen on television before. Behind the scenes, though, Mayberry was not always as peaceful as it appeared on screen. Andy loved keeping the atmosphere loose and playful between takes. Pranks, songs, and laughter filled the set whenever the cameras stopped rolling. Most of the cast thrived in that environment. Frances Bavier did not. She took her craft with absolute seriousness and had very little patience for anything she considered unprofessional. That difference in personalities created a tension between her and Andy that lasted for years, never fully resolving itself until she reached out to apologize near the very end of her life. Even in the middle of all that success, recognition continued to slip just out of Andy's reach. Don Knotts won multiple Emmy Awards for his portrayal of Barney Fife. Frances Bavier won one for Aunt Bee. Andy, despite carrying the entire show on his shoulders for 8 seasons, never received a single Emmy nomination for playing Sheriff Taylor. Not one. There is something quietly devastating about giving everything you have to something and watching the recognition land everywhere except on you. Andy never spoke bitterly about it in public. That was not his style. He smiled, he deflected, he made a joke and moved the conversation somewhere else. But those who knew him well understood that it stung in a way that never completely went away. By 1967, he had made his decision. He told CBS he was done with Mayberry. The network pushed back. They wanted another season, possibly more. Andy declined politely but firmly. He wanted new challenges, new roles, new opportunities to prove that Sheriff Taylor was only one small part of what he was capable of. What followed was a difficult stretch that tested him in ways fame never had. Films that disappointed. Television projects that failed to find their audience. A multi-picture deal with Universal Studios that collapsed after Andy disliked the first finished film so much that he refused to complete the remaining pictures in the contract. Creative disagreements with network executives who wanted car chases and explosions while Andy wanted character and emotional honesty. For a man who had once been the center of the most consistently rated show on American television, those years carried a particular kind of loneliness that success makes harder to admit. But Andy Griffith was not built for surrender. In 1983, doctors diagnosed him with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare and serious neurological disorder that left him temporarily paralyzed from the knees down. People who heard the news quietly wondered if his career was finished. Andy apparently never entertained that possibility for a single moment. He went through months of grueling rehabilitation and came out the other side ready to work. In 1986 he stepped into the role of Ben Matlock, a sharp and folksy defense attorney who became one of television's most recognizable figures all over again. The preparation that went into that role was extraordinary. Many of Matlock's most memorable courtroom speeches required Andy to stand for long stretches while wearing knee braces beneath his famous seersucker suit. He carried note cards everywhere he went and spent entire weekends memorizing pages of dense legal dialogue so that when Monday morning arrived and the cameras rolled, he could deliver those lengthy monologues in a single take. According to co-star Nancy Stafford, the cast and crew would spontaneously burst into applause when he finished. Now comes the part of this story that was never reported. Never written about. Never turned into a headline. The moment that everyone who witnessed it carried quietly with them for the rest of their lives. It happened during the second season of The Andy Griffith Show on an otherwise ordinary afternoon when the cast and crew were midway through a regular filming day. Word reached the set that President John F. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. Within minutes, it was confirmed. He was gone. And Andy Griffith, the calmest man anyone on that set had ever worked beside, completely fell apart. He began knocking over props. He slammed his fists against the filing cabinet inside the Mayberry courthouse set, again and again, the sound echoing through a room that had gone completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because every single person standing in that room understood that what they were watching was not anger. It was grief in its rawest and most honest form. Don Knotts did not try to talk him down or pull him away. He simply walked over, put his arm around his closest friend, and stayed there. No words. No performance. Just presence. Production shut down for the rest of the day, and the cast quietly went home to process a tragedy that had reached into every corner of the country. But Don did not leave. He stayed beside Andy until he was certain his friend was going to be all right. That moment, more than any Emmy, more than any award that was given to someone else, more than any Hollywood disappointment or health battle or career setback, revealed exactly who Andy Griffith was when the cameras were off and the world was not watching. He was a man who felt things deeply. A man who loved his country and grieved for it honestly. A man whose closest friend knew that sometimes the only thing you can offer someone is simply the willingness to stand beside them in the dark. Andy Griffith passed away in July 2012 at the age of 86, quietly, at his home on Roanoke Island, buried within hours according to his own wishes, with no public funeral and no grand farewell. Just the way he would have wanted it.